Hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of the Student Voices podcast. Today we're going to be joined by college students from different campuses and backgrounds to reflect on the 2024 election, explore its impact on campus life, student activism, and the future of education and civic engagement. I'm Rotimi, and today I'm joined by
Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla. I'm a senior at Yale University. I'm from North Carolina. I went to North Carolina public schools my whole life.
Amazing. So we will be the two facilitators of this conversation. And just to kick things off, want to have everybody on the call introduce themselves and share just a little bit about their background. Where are you from? What are you studying? And what brought you to this conversation today? You start with Grayson.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Grayson Elliott. I'm a freshman at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm originally from a small rural town in Western North Carolina, and I'm studying neuroscience and medical anthropology. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today because I'm passionate about creating spaces for public discourse and creating spaces where we can come together and talk about things that we disagree about to build towards a better future.
Thanks so much, Grayson. You can go next, Ashley.
Hi everyone, my name is Asha Espinosa Reyes. I am the firstborn daughter of two Mexican immigrants and grew up in Stockton, California, a small town in Northern California that kind of bordered between the Bay and city culture and the Central Valley farming agricultural industry. As the daughter of two Mexican immigrants, I think it's super important for me coming from Stockton, which was at some point in 2019 the most diversity in America, to understand how different policies affect all of the communities in my city and come to an understanding of what changes need to be made in order to accommodate and truly uplift every community.
Glad to have you here. Just got shout out at 916. I was raised in Sacramento, so spent some time in Stockton visiting family friends every month. Um, but yeah, next we'll go to Tenzin.
Talk more about that later.
Amazing.
Yeah, hi. I'm Tenzin. I'm a junior at Yale studying migration and health and Spanish. I'm from Naugatuck, Connecticut, and I also grew up in South India on a Tibetan refugee village or settlement. And yeah, so much to some of the folks already. I um, am a child of immigrants as well as refugees, and I guess I'm in this conversation today because, well, Rotimi asked me to be here, but also because I'm interested to hear how other college students have reacted and responded to um, this past election, as well as what our thoughts are collectively. So yeah, I'm super happy to be part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Tenzin.
Iha, how about you?
Hey, hi guys. My name is Iha Putnaik. I'm a senior at Dartmouth and I'm majoring in environmental studies and government. And I'm from Apex, North Carolina. Me and Kayla actually went to high school together. But yeah, I was interested in coming on this talk, obviously, because Kayla asked me to. But other than that, growing up attending like public school in the South, like I've experienced firsthand like the intersection between race, socioeconomics, and like education and like the public education system. So super excited to be here.
Thanks, Yeehaw. We are so excited to have you on this call tonight. Um, I think Kayla's gonna
Yeah.
get us kicked off with our first question.
Yeah, so the first thing that we want to hear from you all is just your raw and honest thoughts and feelings since the election. It's about 2 weeks after the results have been counted and decided, with no major contestations. And so we just want to know how you all have been since the election. Did anything surprise you? And how has being on your campuses been different, been the same? What's the vibe?
And
I
anybody
guess
can feel free to unmute. Sorry.
No, you're good. I guess I can go first. I think one of the immediate reactions I had to the election results was disappointment, and frustration. I think disappointment and frustration just because this is the second time the US has had a woman as a candidate for the presidency in less than a decade. And immediately after, I was at a conference in Iceland, the Reykjavik Global Forum, and it's focused on getting women in power across the world. So one of the stark, I guess, realizations that happened for me, especially in the immediate days following the election, was realizing that other countries were moving forward in gender parity and simply their trust in women and female leadership versus the United States had failed twice to elect a woman to leader as the nation's leader. And so I think one of the first realizations was wondering if we'd ever get to that point, especially because in Clinton's campaign, she won the popular vote. So there was a possibility there for there to have been a female president, but it felt like, especially drastically in the numbers we saw in the popular vote this election around, I'm not sure. There's a lot of factors that definitely went into it, but it feels like we took a step back in terms of simply that aspect.
I can go next. Just like kind of building on what you said. That was one of my like first like thoughts after seeing the election results. Like at least with 2016, I feel like I was a little bit like, oh, like it's just an electoral college, like that's what's wrong. And like obviously like we were in middle school, what did I know? I've become a lot more cynical. But like this time seeing like the popular vote as well, like that was quite disheartening. And like I guess like that's like the main word I could just like say. Like it just feels disheartening to see that like Donald Trump was elected and like just in like so many ways, like from a human rights standpoint, like from like being a queer woman of color, from like and like as someone who's like wants to work with the environment, like that's also just so devastating considering like these are really like urgent years for action and like now like a lot of things are gonna be reversed. They're not gonna be stepped up to the place that we need it to be. And then in terms of like campus life and like the political climate, like at the end of the day, like I attend an Ivy League and it is a little bit of a bubble. So I wouldn't say like and I'm in the Northeast as well. So like I wouldn't say it was anything necessarily crazy in terms of what happened on campus. It was like funny leading up to the election, at least when people would like try to get me to register vote, and I'd just be like, "I'm from the South," and they'd back off. Like, but like other than that, the next day, like the campus just felt gloomy. Like it was like raining too. I was like, it's kind of funny almost. But yeah, that's
Yeah, I guess I can go next. Thank you both. I remember the day after. It was what like nearly like I think it was like 75, almost 80 degrees and like cloudy and I don't know, it was just like yeah, and I mean I'm in Connecticut, so it was just like such a weird day. And I just remember like walking on campus and there were just like some friends that like I wasn't like quite as close to like just like came up to me to like, give me a hug because like I guess they also needed the hug. But I don't know, like it was very strange to be on campus like immediately after. I think leading up to the election, um, you know, I was very excited, but I also had a lot of hope for what it could mean to have someone like Harris in power, to like beyond representation, like but also like acknowledging the fact that it would have been she would have been our first, like female, Black, and South Asian like president. But even beyond representation, like and thinking about the consequences of the election, like I think that's what had given me the most anxiety and just like because I was at a watch party. I went like right after studying at the library. And it was like 10 at that point. So I was just watching like the map like change colors and my friends and I were just, like super anxious, but in my head, I was thinking about, what it could mean, and now like what it will mean to have Trump in office again, and in terms of how consequential it will be for the human rights of so many people, of women, and also like what it means for our institutions, our education system, our healthcare systems, and so on. And I guess it didn't help that like my work assignment for that week was to analyze Project 2025, like the 900-page document, in terms of seeing like what health policy changes that they were hoping to enact. So yeah, I think it was definitely a really disorienting week, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a very interesting week, especially I think as it was mentioned earlier, like there was a lot going on. There was a lot of energy before the election, and that pretty much all came to a halt. It was, I mean, the day after the election, you wouldn't have really known that there was an election. And I think what's been most interesting to me is just to see um, how different campaign promises and deliverables have now translated or in the process of translating into picks for cabinet positions and into policy that's going to be implemented. And I think that will be an interesting thing to track moving forward. So
Thanks, guys. Lots of great perspectives shared there. Now, thinking about post-election, does anybody have any thoughts on what you think the election results reveal about where we are as a nation, what matters the most to voters, um, what what the election really just reveals about the ways that the American people feel right now emotionally?
yeah, I think the biggest thing is that the majority of Americans wanted change. A lot of people were not happy with the state of the economy. A lot of people had some frustrations with immigration. A lot of people had some frustrations with world peace, and they perceived what they thought was change, and the candidate that they thought was going to bring them the most change. And I think everyone, or there were two groups of people who perceived that change differently, and the majority of people thought that change was Donald Trump. And as I previously mentioned, it'll be interesting to see how that change is carried out. And now, with there being pretty much a one party dominating the federal government in all regards, it'll be interesting to see how that policy actually progresses and if there actually is change in world peace, in like immigration and in the economy.
I think, oh, sorry. Um, I think like one interesting point that has been like discussed and kind of like brought up like post-election kind of has been like the like campaign strategy of the Democratic Party and how it's not been successful. And like I'm gonna kind of refer to it like in blasé terms. So I feel like they like kind of took more of an elitist strategy. And I feel like if we look at like the statistics of like who voted for who is like the average American, I guess you could say. Like I think the Democratic Party appealed a little bit too much to just educated voters and like didn't focus as much energy as was needed to the issues that are actually relevant to uneducated voters. For instance, like talking about the economy instead and like stuff I feel like that is more relevant to the average American instead of shaping it like, oh, look, like this queer person's rights are on the line. Like, yes, that is a relevant issue, but that's not an all-encompassing issue that appeals to the voters that you would need in order to win an election.
Okay, just or sorry, did someone else want to go? Okay. Yeah, I that made me think about so I am currently working with a professor and his research is on like understanding like the rise of like the multiracial right. Or just like his research question is um over the past years, why is it that like we're seeing more diversification in like the voting blocks for conservative like right-leaning votes? And I think like to touch on what you were saying about the elitist approach that the Democratic like platform was like taking in terms of just trying to get voters. Like I think that's entirely apparent in thinking about like who exactly turned out to the polls. Like, and I think what has been helpful about just like engaging with his research is that um, what he's looking at is the fact that, you know, in a lot of ways, like the right has been able to really master grassroots like activism in terms of getting people like energized, mobilized, but also how like so many of the events, rallies, like had such low barriers to entry, like in terms of like physically being at the locations, but also like the types of language that would be employed. It would be things that were accessible largely to the average person, for example. So and then like I think one of the critiques um, that like have been found out was just how like in like more left-leaning strategies for engaging voters, like a lot of it requires even at a basic level, like a higher literacy rate in terms of like the different concepts that are being talked about, the different language that's being used, and um, and yeah, I mean like that's certainly like one way that like we're seeing, or like or that's certainly one reason why like we saw what we saw, as well as just like the disconnect of the Democratic Party with the average person, as you were saying, like and how we're seeing that in the polls across all like lines. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple things that came up for me reflecting on how the campaigns went. I think Grayson brought this up, but he mentioned the perception of things. And I think a lot of the country want to change is a good way to put it. I don't think they knew how to perceive what the right change was. And that's an issue that I think I have been like expanding on more and more in conversations in classes, is talking about how our like primary education system is kind of failing at educating our students in terms of how to understand the economy, and kind of critiquing how the most in depth we get into understanding such complex topics is in college, something that isn't readily available to most of the population and isn't made affordable or even free or accessible. So it's a conversation about how do we start affecting the voter bloc to make sure they're educated, and not even just educated, I want to say informed about the decisions they're making and the consequences they have. And so while like there is this perception of it was a better choice, I think incumbent bias played a huge role in that, as well as foreign policies and just a lack of understanding of how a vice president serves an administration and doesn't necessarily champion their own platform, was something that caused people to stray away from the Harris campaign, and just fear. I think overall fear. And so I think those are two things that I've been thinking about, is how to kind of impact the voter block. So those, that education that we so perceive as necessary to make a right choice in voting isn't limited to college, which is at this point in time expensive and inaccessible to a lot of populations, and two, how to make sure that voters aren't depending, like basing their vote off of fear and this kind of weaponization of daily life that leads them to make a choice they feel is the best. And like, I think we saw this post-election, one of the highest searches ended up being, can I change my vote? And I think people came to the realization very early on after, and it's a conversation that happens a lot, is the fact that I think in the right and in the conservative party, there isn't critiques that happen because of just like this no prisoners left behind type of thing, type of attitude that is taken on. So all of the support gets put behind a candidate and no critiques are made, at least effectively, versus on the left, I think we and the liberal side have more thoughts and ideas and just like critiques of our own party that create these cleavages and diverge our the and being welcomed by the president of Iceland, and all these conversations about what it means to correct a lot of the attitudes that are going on in the world that are had by young men and boys, is like this idea that for a long time, especially when we come to consider the progression of female and women leadership, is this idea that we could do it without including the male perspective, or at least the male narrative into that like project. And so a conversation I've been having, especially after seeing the Latino vote and witnessing how drastic that was, at least in my communities, is understanding that there needs to be work done to have conversations and understand that a woman's empowerment doesn't take away from a man's and doesn't threaten a man's empowerment or position. And so there are conversations that I think for a long time haven't been addressed because it's just not something we think to. And so one of the conversations we had is just that the Trump campaign poured millions of dollars into like Twitch platforms and these spaces where toxic masculinity and discussions are happening already. And kind of we're able to capture a specific voter bloc that was already feeling threatened, and kind of just push them to their vote to their side. And I think they utilize that through not only Twitch, but YouTubers, Andrew Tate, type of influencers of that realm, versus I think the left was focusing on making sure that women knew what was at stake and making sure that women knew that they could vote their way. I think there was a lot of commercials focused in the Midwest surrounding that. Um, and I think we just failed because we didn't think we'd get that vote anyways. We failed to go into those spaces and have conversations and do the work to potentially win back those votes and have a coalition of men and women working and non-binary people working towards the same thing. But specifically in the Latino aspect, I will personally be doing work up until the next election to address the threat that they feel, and kind of creating a vision of a future where Latino men and women can stand by each other.
Yeah, and I think something interesting that's been brought up is just um, analyzing the education level among different voters, and that's something that I find particularly fascinating, being from a rural area of the South, where in my county, about 20% of the population has a bachelor's degree. In the neighboring county, Ashe County, 21% of the population has a bachelor's degree or higher, and then I believe the lowest percentage in Western North Carolina is about 8.9%, and that's Gates County. Um, and I think there's this notion that there's a sort of ignorance among the population, whereas, and I think in a way it disqualifies the idea that people who, just because you don't have education doesn't mean that you don't have a lived experience. And these people know economics, but they might not know what gross GDP is. And I think the approach has been wrong in the sense that many politicians aren't talking about food prices and gas prices and the cost of living, but they're talking about these really complex terms. And and so I think when Harris had said in the past, like our political plan is, or our economic plan is backed by this many political science professors at the Wharton School in Pennsylvania, like that doesn't really mean a whole lot to many populations who are legitimately suffering from the economic state of the country right now. And so I think that moving forward, politicians in general can do a better job of recognizing that a lack of education doesn't mean a lack of lived experience. And once they can start to relate to and target that lived experience, I think that they will better relate to the audiences that they want to connect with.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Grayson. And could I just add on, like, I think, yeah, I remember like immediately, like I think the day after the election, like, I kept on seeing like Instagram stories where it would be, maps of, like you were saying, like, like levels of educational attainment versus like like whether or not the state was red or blue, and I think like for many reasons like rhetoric like that is particularly heinous, like for the reasons you like listed, which are like, it assumes that like, I mean, the underlying argument is that you voted this way or that way because you had education or did not have it, so far as to say like, this was the educated like vote and this one wasn't. And of course, like that's not like a neat line you can draw. And I think that what you were saying about lived experiences like is actually like, I think there's a lot there. Because I mean, if you aren't, attaining education, you're probably working, and at that, like you're working in industries, services that you otherwise wouldn't have access to, like if you had if you were able to get higher education. And I think, like you were saying, like um, once like for example, like the Democratic Party is able to really like get down to see what like the daily needs are of people within like rural areas, within rural states, or just like regions that don't have high levels of like higher educational attainment, like it would like be able to you know inform policy and agenda like priorities that would like reach more folks that way. I think it's really um, it's really divisive and also like unproductive to take like educational inequality and take that to mean this is why you voted this way or that way, rather than this is educational inequality and the specific needs of these regions. Um, yeah,
I love that we've landed on education already in this conversation, because it really makes me want to ask you all, since you've already done a really great job at analyzing the role of education in voters who are all over the age of 18. They've all made it through the K-12 system. Um, I'd really love to ask you about the future of education for the next generation of students, particularly with the administration that we are expecting. Um, President-elect Trump has selected the co-founder of WWE to be the new Department of Education secretary. Forgive me for not remembering her name. I remembered the WWE, Linda McMahon. But he's also made a lot of comments about actually getting rid of the Department of Education entirely. So I'd really love to hear you guys. What can we expect for the future of students? I know we've all gone through K-12. We are most likely going to graduate in his administration. But what can we expect from this new version of Trump?
I think one thing when thinking about how potentially, the talk of dismantling the Department of Education is one conversation, but the actions thus far of naming a co-founder of a WWE of a corporation to education secretary kind of already strikes from me the wrong tone, specifically because education and how you run a school system is not a business. It's not about profit. It's not about what is most beneficial for a company. It's about the students. And I think that's a conversation that doesn't oftentimes align with profit. And there's a reason for it. There's a lot of shortcomings that we still have to address in the educational system. And oftentimes that's seen as costly, but it's simply the consequences of years of neglect and just failures in an education system thus far. And so that makes me worried, especially when talking about school funding and what it means to strive towards equality in different school systems, especially when we're talking about the rural areas, having conversations about what they lack, how schools oftentimes will go without power or don't have the right facilities to support success for all students. And that obviously plays a role into these maps we saw that came out. And I think a lot of people think of education and like this reform as only benefiting one student over the other, but it's supposed to benefit every student who needs the aid and needs the help. And oftentimes that just doesn't sit well with a corporation framework, in my opinion. This cost benefit attitude just won't lead to success in a system meant to acknowledge shortcomings and then fill them. And then the other thing that specifically for me makes me worried is this conversation about eliminating universal access to like Head Start and pre-K and like programs that are meant to establish skills for kids to come into the classroom and be ready to learn. And as someone who graduated from the public school system my entire life up until college, I do think those systems allow families to be able to balance the role of caregiver while providing education, a source of education to their kids early on and setting them up for success. And there's been multiple studies done that show that those systems specifically, or resources in the educational system, allow a student to develop at better rates or just be more equipped to come into a classroom first grade and learn more information quicker or have skills ready to take full advantage of an education system ready to serve them. So I'm just quite honestly a little skeptical about what this will mean for graduation rates or test scores or reading scores across the nation.
Um, I can go again, but I can also shut up if needed. Just let me know if anyone else wanted to jump in. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and also like Ashley, like what you were saying at the end about um literacy rates, about graduation rates. I think that's actually like really interesting because I was looking into what exactly like the 900-page document says about like what the plans are for the Department of Education. And I think like the recurring theme that we're gonna have to be ready for like for this upcoming administration is just like I think like it's like making the government more efficient and cutting like redundancies. There's the oh my God, what is it? It's like the new department, or supposedly the new department under Elon Musk, like the department for all I know is it's about government efficiency, and it spells out Doge because I don't even know. But yeah, so I think actually like a lot of the reasons within Project 2025 as it relates to education have to do with like addressing the fact that, or to them, like they envision things like abolishing the Department of Education as a means of increasing accountability for the performances of schools by returning like funding to the states for their discretion, and like minimizing like um, what's it called, the distance between like parents and families. Although they like heavily emphasize like the role of parents like within education, which I don't agree with. But yeah, so they're talking more so about it from that front. But at the same time, like I think in terms of thinking about education, like I'm not sure if removing such a essential like coordinating and standardizing institution like the Department of Education is going to be the answer that we need. And also like other, I was also like curious to see like what um, the plans in 2025 are, or like are as it relates to actually, as you were mentioning, like public education. I mean, I am the product of like public schools, like K through 12, and yeah, and I worked on like my school board like for 2 years. So public school is really important to me, and I care about it a lot. But like in just thinking about like reducing fundings for public schools and moving towards more privatized like options like for education, I think yeah, I can't imagine like how harmful that is going to be for the development of so many children, like and diverse like communities as well. Um and yeah, so it's definitely going to be a long haul. Yeah.
Um,
Actually, sorry, while I have you guys all here, I want to make sure that we can also pivot into talking about potential solutions, because you guys are all so smart and definitely going to be leaders, in the next few years. I just want to be mindful of our time, if that's all right with you guys. So, obviously, there are going to be a lot of challenges, um, coming over the next 4 years, and I think something that is really pertinent over the last three elections that we've really witnessed in our lifetime are the issues of misinformation and polarization being pretty significant challenges in recent elections. So I'm curious about what your guys' thoughts are based on your lived experiences or anything you might have been familiar with just in your personal lives. How do you think we can navigate these issues while also fostering civil discourse and working together for meaningful, productive change and conversations both on campuses, but also in broader society?
Yeah, so Rotimi, I'm going to answer the previous question and tie that into the current question, if that's okay. Um, my dad is now a retired former school superintendent, and I and our family is very passionate about public education. Both my parents were the first to graduate from college, and I think I have, for a very long time, understood what education can do for someone, as a tool and as a vehicle to success, and in particular, public education. But the attack on public education didn't begin on November 5th, when we found out that Donald Trump was going to be the president, the next president. Yeah, at least here in North Carolina, there for the last 5 or 6 years have been long legislative battles over private school vouchers and the state legislative branch trying to strip tens of millions of dollars away from public school funding to go to funding private institutions. And so I think it's also really important to understand that while there are these changes at the national level, it's ultimately really the state level and the local level down to local school boards that have the greatest influence over policy. I mean, there are lawsuits right now in Texas, and I think they just ended one in Florida about like the having the Bible and the Ten Commandments in public schools. But the reason why public schools are so important is because it fosters the skills and it fosters a setting in which you can have open discourse and you can learn how to encounter and how to understand perspectives that you might disagree with, that you might agree with in a setting that is genuine and authentic and unaltered, hopefully by some other political influence. And I think that, at least in my own background, public school has given me the platform to learn how to be around people who are different than me and disagree with me. Here at Chapel Hill, a public university, it's great to be surrounded by a diverse student body, where I can have open conversation and where we can talk about things that are difficult and that we disagree about. But Rotimi, as you're pointing out, like having these conversations is crucial to moving forward with our future. And I think that misinformation, which has been largely perpetuated by social media, is ultimately a threat to discourse and is a threat to moving forward as a country. Because if we can't agree on what is real and what is not real, then it becomes very hard to have a discussion about what we can do to improve. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna speak in terms of like misinformation and polarization. Like I guess like my like base of information kind of comes from like what I've studied and known in terms of polarization over climate change. So that's like kind of where my opinions come from. I know this differs a little bit from education, but I'm actually taking a class right now called The Politics of Climate Change, and we've been like reading a lot of like social science studies that kind of go into this concept because climate change obviously is a pretty polarizing issue in the US. And like we've read a lot of studies like looking into how to like lower this polarization. And I guess like I'm just gonna kind of offer like some of the overarching things that I've picked up over this term, although I'm in final season right now, so my brain is like completely frazzled. So I don't remember everything. I can't tell you the names and everything. But one article we read, I don't remember the name, but it was by Goldberg et al. Essentially like looked at generating like enduring change through restructuring people's underlying mental models of climate change. So essentially like looking at how we frame the issue. And so like one issue, like one model they talked about is like the morality mental model. So like essentially using moral messages to engage people with the issue of climate change. Like an example would be like the Christian ethic of stewardship of the earth, like humans have been given the responsibility to care for it. We read another article about like who is delivering these messages, like that can also be relevant. Like for instance, they looked into like Pope Francis. He like released like this speech or a paper or whatever where he essentially was like, we like as like Christians have a duty to be like stewardship, like stewards of the earth. Like it's like our moral duty to do this. And like they the authors of the study kind of looked at how this appealed to Christians and like members of the right as well. To do it along moral lines. They've like there's like studies looking into having like people of authority that are more trusted by the right, such as like military officials and like other specific types of officials, like giving these messages. So that's like one like thing to consider. And like in terms of like framing, like even like using the word like climate change kind of like has a sizable effect in like deterring Republicans like belief versus like saying air pollution instead. So just like thinking about those things about like how we communicate these problems, how we frame these problems, like who is saying these problems, like I think that is like a really relevant lesson for us to take, not only in climate change, obviously, but like going forward in other polarizing issues if we do want to like lower this divide, this partisan divide that we have.
And I feel that we're already brainstorming, we're already also forward thinking and preparing for what's to come and envisioning how we as adults, as college graduates, as college students, wherever we are in the next 4 years, will be engaging in this work. So I just want to ask you all, like, what are your hopes for the next 4 years? And what role do you think you will play? What role do you think future college students will play in whatever work we all think needs to be done?
Um, yeah. Okay, I think one of the so I mean, of course, like post like election week, I like needed a second to like yeah, whatever. But I think what has given me hope like immediately after that was um kind of leaning more into like what my friends were saying in terms of like or my friends that were like for example like working for Students for Justice in Palestine like in terms of the fact that regardless of who like would be in power like there would have had to be work done regardless like in terms of demanding more in terms of demanding better like whether or not it was Harris whether or not it was or I mean now it is like Trump but um that there is always going to be work to be done in terms of wanting more and better. And of course, like now there's newer challenges that we have to like contend with, like as young people, as students, and so on. But I think that just knowing that, you know, the fight doesn't end every 4 years based on who it is, like um, I think that's what's given me hope and kind of gotten me out of my funk like post election week. Like just knowing that regardless of who it is, like young people are always going to, and all people, but like young people especially, like are going to be able to ask for more and better and work towards that.
I think for me, the next 4 years are going to look like a lot of work, a lot of defensive work. I mean, I'm from California, so my state is pretty safe for a little bit at least. And so I think just moving my efforts to, I don't know, look into places in the South where women's rights are more threatened immediately and do work regarding just the way in which Latinos perceive issues. I know the idea of the Latino voting bloc has always been like a sleeping giant. And since college, I've come to realize like we can never vote as a sleeping giant, or that sleeping giant will just never awaken because our experiences in the US are so starkly different across like ethnicities. But working towards an understanding of issues that would allow us to I don't know, just be more sympathetic when we vote, I guess, and not just necessarily um, given to this individualistic culture that has captured the United States, especially in the way we vote, and reestablishing our connections with our collectivist cultures in our home countries. Um, and then I think what role I'm going to play in that is probably being the person to start those awkward Thanksgiving conversations and really difficult and uncomfortable, um, you know, narratives that are going to make a lot of people angry. But I think a lot of the times why we haven't been able to find progress is because no one's willing to be uncomfortable. Or there's like the ageism approach that comes in where older people just refuse to hear a younger perspective, or the opposite. And so I think, yeah, my part in that will definitely be on the communication part. And we'll see how that plays out.
Um, I would say that Well, first of all, I have a pretty cynical view of the federal government anyways. I've never been like, oh yes, like the Democrats are in, we're saved. Like I have my criticisms of both parties and just like the governmental like institutions and systems in the US. One thing I would say is like now considering that our federal system is fully controlled by the right, which doesn't necessarily align with a lot of things that I would hope for in this country in terms of climate, in terms of education, like just like so many issues. I think like a big thing is like as like people, as activists, as people who like care about these issues, about each other, about the state of the world and the state of our country, is like maybe shifting our focus from just like focusing on like a federal election and thinking about what we can do on a more local capacity. Like I think we have to focus on like community-based orgs, like mutual aid funds, like stuff like that. And beyond just that, like even from like a government standpoint, like looking into more like local and state governments. Like one example, for instance, is even though like whatever is going on a national like level, like Hanover, New Hampshire, like where Dartmouth is right now, and like other parts of New Hampshire, like on like a town level have like been decarbonizing their own energy grids with their own like state and local funds. And there is a lot of work there that can be done, not just like in New Hampshire and Hanover. There's like stuff happening in North Carolina with like the carbon plan and like how the IRA is like funding like local efforts everywhere. So I think that there's like a lot that can be done on like a local and state level. In terms of like what I would like to contribute towards this. I don't know, I'm like kind of having an identity crisis. Like I graduate this year. There is no job lined up for as of right now. Like I'm like still figuring that out. But like one recent thing for me is like at least like I was like originally gonna go into like wildlife conservation, and I guess like just like recently I've been thinking about like what impact I want to have on the world and like where I think I can make the most impact and the most realistic impact. And like again, this is like really specific and like not really relevant to everyone, but like just like me personally, like I kind of want to like switch from just doing something really specific to instead doing like work that is more about like climate, just because like that's more of an all-encompassing issue that affects other parts of the environment. So I guess just like personally just like reflecting what we can do that is like actually like efficient and effective despite the state of the federal government is kind of what my overarching like lesson or takeaway there is.
Yeah, and I think just to echo some of the sentiment that everyone else has expressed, there is still so much good in our world, in our country, in our communities. And I don't think we should let anyone tell us that our best days are behind us. And I think we keep moving forward as a society. And each of us and those who feel empowered can be leaders in their communities and to try to find the good and to illuminate that good. We can all create change, and it might not be at the federal level or even at the state level, but we can create change within our communities. And as it was echoed before, there's so many issues that affect so many people that have become political. And I think once you start to change the narrative around those issues, I think it becomes much more accessible. But I think at the end of the day, we can keep trying to build positive communities that uplift one another and really seek to move forward in unity, to move forward in compassion, and move forward towards a better America, which I think we're continuing to strive towards. So it's been really great speaking with all of you guys today to hear everybody's perspectives. So thank you.
Wow, this was such a great conversation, guys. I'm really grateful that you all stepped up and shared such thoughtful, nuanced thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's clear that young people have a vital role to play in shaping the future, and your voices are so essential in these conversations. We'd also like to thank the Sandra Conway Foundation and the Burroughs Welcome Fund for supporting the work of the Dudley Flood Center for Educational Equity and Opportunity. To our listeners, we hope today's discussion has inspired you to think about how you can get involved and make your voice heard. Remember, democracy doesn't end or begin on election day. It's a year-round effort. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time on the Student Voices podcast.